All right, good evening, everybody. It is 8:30. We're going to get started here. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group with Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Brian, and I am an alcoholic. A reminder, we record all the speakers here, so if you want to get a copy of a CD that you hear here, if you hear a message that you think somebody could benefit from, or you just want a copy of a speaker here, you can get the CDs. You can get the speaker from tonight. Will be available next Saturday. You can also get it from our sister group, which is Thursday nights, 7:30. It's at Salem Church up the street there. It's a big book study. That church is going to be hosting an event we have upcoming in 2 weeks. It's going to be a workshop going on there with Chris R. and Chris from New Jersey also. They're going to be doing a workshop starting at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's going to go till about 4 o'clock, and then we're going to break. It's going to come down here. The speaker for that night is going to be Chris R. from Texas. He's going to be speaking here at the normally scheduled time of 8:30. He'll be doing that. Reminder, we have the Conscious Contact Speaker Group hoodies. We got T-shirts. We got tank tops. We got whatever you need. If you're interested in buying anything like that, contributing, please see me, Ron, or Maggie after the meeting. What else we got? We got a Facebook page. We got a website. They're both like good resources to stay informed on like the happenings. You know, if you want to stay informed on happenings throughout the area with AA, different groups post like anniversaries, celebrations that happen. Usually we have flyers in the back over there. If you have like an anniversary or a celebration coming up, bring in a flyer, post it to the Facebook page. With that, I'm going to bring Nick up here. Nick's going to chair the meeting.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Nick. I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be here. I'm gratefully clean and sober. Welcome to Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a 1-hour speaker meeting that meets every Saturday night at St. Paul's Lutheran Church, 301 North Main Street, at 8:30 p.m. in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. The business meeting for this group meets every Saturday night at 7 p.m. until 7:30 right here. The purpose of this group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God reliance and service to others through the practice and teaching of the 12 steps. We record all speakers so that others may benefit from their message of recovery. If you wish not to be recorded, simply ask. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The group would like to welcome everyone, especially newcomers. Is there anyone new or from out of town that would like to introduce themselves with their first name? Yes, hello. Gabrielle, welcome. Hey, Lisa, welcome. Welcome. Yes, sir. Hey, Bart. Welcome. Hey, Dave. Welcome. Excellent. Are there any announcements on the floor for the good of AA? Oh, hello, Maggie.
Hi, I'm an alcoholic. Tuesday, September 3rd, the Northwell Group is having their 73rd anniversary. Beginning at 7 p.m. playing a big fun fellowship followed by 2 speakers, 1 AA, 1 Al-Anon, and from 8 to 9 at the church on the side. So that's one
Thanks. Thank you. We have meeting lists and big books on easy terms. Please see me or any home group member after the meeting. If you cannot afford a big book, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group will give you one at no charge. Anyone willing to make donations for the purchase of big book and CDs to help those who can't afford them can put donations in a jar on the table marked Big Book and CD Donations. If you'd like a CD of any speaker, past or present, please see myself or Ron before or after the meeting. They're available free of charge. And with that, I have Dave to come up and read the AA preamble. Come on, Dave.
Good evening. My name is Dave. I'm an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And I have Alex to come up and read the AA 12 Steps of Recovery.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alex, and I am an alcoholic. These are the AA 12 steps of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Thank you.
We had one quick announcement. Ron decided that all hoodies are free with a $20 donation. So if you want to grab one. We have a 7th tradition which states every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. We have no dues or fees, but we do have expenses. The group provides many services. Your donations will cover rent, big books, CDs, events, workshops, etc. Once again, there's absolutely no smoking on church property. Please take a moment to silence all cell phones and limit movement during the meeting to avoid distractions. Now to introduce our speaker, a good friend of the Conscious Contact Speaker Group, we have Devin C. from No Serenity till Brooklyn, from Brooklyn, New York.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Devin. I am a recovered alcoholic. I'm going to invite everybody to join me in a moment of silence really quick before we get started. All right. Thank you. I want to thank everybody for being here. I'm really excited that I got to have a Saturday night off and come and join you guys. I usually work on nights and weekends, so this is a rare treat for me to get a chance to take a drive and come be with you guys. I want to thank Ron for allowing me to be here, and for everybody who greeted me when I came in. I walked in here and I felt welcome, and that's something I try to do in an AA group, and I really appreciate it when it's something that I get to experience on the other end. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's all I got. That's really all that I think any of us ever really have to offer is our experience. And I want you to know that standing up here in a suit is something that is totally crazy for me. I don't normally wear suits, but I do have one now. The last time I wore this suit was on my wedding day, which was a couple months ago, and that says a lot because you're going to hear a story of a guy who is not fit to be in any kind of a relationship. And I'm really, it feels great. I never had a tailored suit before, and I'm really happy that I know what that feels like today. What you're looking at is a guy that at 8 years old, the doctors or my school teacher or whatever, they started telling my parents that, I needed to go get evaluated. Because at 8 years old, I'm the kind of person that was, causing a lot of problems. I had a lot of outbursts. And I went and saw some doctor, and they basically put me on clinical methamphetamine at 8 years old. And so it seems like from the very beginning, I'm one of those people that, just was a little bit over here when everybody else seemed to be over here. And the interesting thing is I look back at being in second grade and taking this medication is, for a lot of people, methamphetamine is like a make you go fast. And for me, it just kind of slowed me down. And that's kind of historic, it's the way my drinking looks, too. Alcohol's supposed to slow a lot of people down. I watched my wife have a few drinks. She has, a drink, and she needs to stop because she's getting slowed down. And when I take a drink, I get kind of fired up. It seems to do something within me that wasn't what everybody else was experiencing around me, or a lot of people around me experienced. So most of my life I felt awkward. I don't know if you guys understand that. I felt like I looked funny if I would catch my mirror walking down the street in like a window. I thought I walked funny. I thought I talked funny. Listening to myself in a microphone would have been really tough. I would listen to how you laughed, and I would try to emulate laughter like you. And when I would just stand around, I kind of felt always off balance. And it was like if you just kind of nudged me, I might have just fallen over. And I don't know what that was, but I know that when I had my first drink, all of it went away. And I just assumed up until this moment when I was like 12 or 13 that was what life was, that I just felt uncomfortable. And I thought that was normal. And then one day, we showed up to my friend's parents' liquor cabinet, and we grabbed a bottle of gin, and we just said, all right, we're gonna go in at this thing. And the first time I ever drank, I drank to get drunk. I drank to feel it. I go, I want to know what this is about. I didn't want to have a drink, and we just like slammed a bunch of shots. And all I can really remember is for the first time in my life, I just kind of sat back and was okay. And feeling okay is, I think, all I've ever really wanted to find. And I think that's all that I see with most people's stories. It just, for some reason, I never felt okay. And alcohol allowed me to feel okay. And in my early years, this is outside of Chicago. I was like born in Indianapolis. This is outside of Chicago now. And it was easier for us to, get our hands on some other stuff. And I'm an adventurous person. And if you want to talk to me about all the other things that went on in my life afterwards, we can swap some stories. But, the long and the short of it is that I went for everything that I could get my hands on. And from an early age, I never had an off switch. It was obvious to me that I didn't have an off switch. And I didn't really see that as a problem because that's what I wanted to do. I went to the partying. If we were at a high school party, I'm the guy holding the case of beer. You know what I mean? Like, I'm the one who always has to know where it's going to come from next. And I found other people like that. And so all the early friendships that I had in the earlier years of my life was all people that kind of had the same intention around drinking. We're here with a purpose. But I didn't immediately start drinking every day. I know people that from 8 years old, they have a drink and it's like all day, every day. I had a really loving family. I still have a really loving family. And not everyone in AA does. But, my family tried to give me everything, and I basically did everything I could to throw it all down the toilet. And so that's kind of what my life looked like. And by the time I was 18, things were not looking great. My 18 years old, Mother's Day comes around, and my mom got a call from an undercover narcotics officer in the city of Chicago that, I made my mom breakfast in bed, I think. We had a great day. And it was, hey, we're going to go hang out with friends. And at that time, we were going into the west side of Chicago, and we were doing some stuff that these guys on the street had. And a couple of undercover narcotics officers pulled us over, and I had this flip phone. I don't remember if you remember flip phones, but mine had like a home button, and the officer took the phone and just pushed the home button. And my dad was walking the dog, and so my mom answers. And, these are the kind of phone calls that I started sending back to my parents and my family, was like getting yelled at by this, plainclothes detective saying, this is what your son's doing right now. Did you know about this? And by the time I was leaving that high school, I ended up in one of these treatment deals. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was 18 and I was in an inpatient rehab, what I had was a misunderstanding, not a problem. And this is what I'm really good at doing. I walked into this treatment facility to get evaluated, and then my parents looked at me and said, you're going to stay. And I lied through the evaluation about everything. I minimized what I was doing, and they looked at me and they said, you're going to stay here. And it's a 28-day thing, and we're just going to do this. And this is the kind of person that I am. I sit down and we have these group therapy things. If you've ever done a rehab, they get you in a group and there's a counselor and they ask you about some stuff. And there was a kid who'd been there 24 days, 25 days, Luke. And Luke has all the right answers to the questions. And he gets like the smile from the counselor. And I noticed that. And I noticed that Luke is kind of getting approval. And so what I do is I listen really hard to what Luke says. And I change the words just a little bit. And from day 4 or 5 in this treatment facility, I sound really good. I can go, I learn the language really quickly. and I learned the language and the treatment stuff at 18, and I learned to be able to figure out how to get you off my back. And in that outpatient, there was a bunch of kids, and nobody was going, AA came in. I got introduced to AA through Alcoholics Anonymous members that showed up and took a meeting into this facility. And so, I got acquainted that there was people that were sober, and there was this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, and, these guys were coming in and sitting with us every night, and we're doing a meeting. And I did all that, and then I ended up in this outpatient thing, and nobody wanted to go to meetings, so I was like, I get it, I'm just going to go to a ton of meetings, and so every time I'd go to this outpatient and do the drug test, and we get there, and they go, how many meetings you went to? I was the only person doing anything. And what that does is that gives me a little bit of a looser noose, and it allows me to have a little more leeway. And all I was doing was just manipulating everybody around me, And the funny thing about the way that works is what I'm really doing is setting myself up to blow my life up again. But I don't see it that way, because I don't have a problem, And so I ended up in this treatment thing, and I ended up moving to Boston. I'd already, applied for a school before this whole blow-up thing, and I'd gotten a really small scholarship, and it was a really small music school in the city of Boston. And against all the advice of all the counselors, my parents said, no, he has to go to this school. And everybody said, you can't let him leave. And the first night that I was there, somebody down the hall was like, hey, we got a case of beer, we're rolling this thing up, if you guys want to come in and hang. And guess what? I was in that room. First night of any kind of freedom, I'm in that room. And when I actually came into Alcoholics Anonymous because I wanted to be here, I had no idea what alcoholism was. And in our book, they talk about how we go on these things called sprees. I took a drink one night, and it was almost 6 years later that I realized that I was totally beaten. My spree lasted about 6 years, and it started a little bit slow. It started with, it looked like it was manageable. For the first couple of weeks, first couple of months, things were okay. But then I'm waking up. First thing in the morning, I want to have a drink. I want to do something else. It became customary for me in those years to wake up, go to the corner store, and just buy a 40. I'm waking up at 11 a.m., and I'm just walking right to the store, and I'm getting a 40, a Colt 45, and I'm taking a walk down by the Charles River, and I think this is totally normal. If you're not doing this, you're the sucker. I looked out at everybody else in the world that was had a job or was doing something, was following the rules, you guys are idiots. What I got going on here is so much better than what you guys are doing. And I felt like it was this big game, and I was totally winning. And I idolized all this stuff. In those years, in the 6-year period where I was in Boston for 5 years, but in this spree, I realized that I don't know about you, but I don't like working. I never liked the idea of having a job or a boss. I've never enjoyed this in my entire life. And so I said, look, I'll become my own boss. I'll sell these drugs. I'll be the guy who will supply this to this music school. I'll be the dude. And that invited some home invasions. Another great phone call to the mom came from a hospital when I was 19, and I was, getting stitched up. I had staples in my head. My 2 front teeth were broken because I'd gotten hit in the face with brass knuckles. And there was actually people that were tough guys, and they said, we want what this guy's got. And they came into my house, and they broke my door down, and I came 2 hours later sitting in the hospital getting all, stitched up. I got hit with a knife on my arm. I don't know what happened. All I know is that I'm in the hospital getting stitched up, and now I'm sitting back in the house, and some Boston police detective is holding a bag of really soaked pot, and he's like, we found this in your toilet. And I'm sitting there going okay. And so the parents bailed me out one more time, and the roommates kicked me out, and, as soon as anything happened, they were happy when I was there. It's all good times, and as soon as something horrific happens, they just kick me out. The parents come into the rescue one more time. And I learned. I said, look, if I'm going to do this, I got to get better at this. And I was more small time at that point. And I guess I'm still small time. I'm not a big drug dealer or anything. Let's not get it twisted. But I realized that if I was selling a couple of pounds of pot a week versus a little small amount, then maybe I would just see less people and this would work. And for the next 3 years, it totally worked. And I didn't have any more armed robberies or any of that stuff. And so what I ended up having was a drawer full of cash. And I was going to this music school, and it was it really doesn't matter. All my heroes were junkies and alcoholics. This is part of what I'm supposed to do here if I'm going to do this. And And I was just, pretty much intoxicated the whole time I was at this school. Met a lot of people, had a lot of fun. I met one guy there, and his name was Will. And Will, if you were to meet him today, well, it's tough because I know Ron now, and I know some of you guys, but Will is like the happiest guy I've ever met. And he's from Hawaii, so I assume, okay, he's from Hawaii, that's why he's so happy. But the story was that he used to, party, and he didn't anymore. And he's an amazing musician, and we ended up playing a little bit together, and we'd be doing our thing at the rehearsal, and he was just totally cool and was hanging out and was making jokes, and he was totally at ease with himself. And at a certain point, he would say hey guys, I gotta run and take care of this other thing, but I'll see you tomorrow for the gig, and he would take off. And everybody would go, man, I love Will, he's the best. When I first met him, I thought he was full of it. I was like, no one can be this kind and compassionate and considerate and generous. But on the fact of how he lived his life, and the fact that I knew that he had at one point said he had a problem with either drinking or drugs, I didn't really know the whole story, I would call him every once in a while. Because I don't know about you, but in this period of a spree for me, there was what I'd call burnouts. I would hit walls, and I would be hit with this desperation that something's got to change, and I can't live like this. And I would get in there and try to manage my life a little bit. And for maybe, a couple of weeks, it would look a little better. And then it would look so good that I would go, what would be great? I should celebrate, and I would have a drink. And then, 3 months later, I'm hitting a wall again, and I'm going, what happened? And then sometimes I would try to manage my life a little bit in this period, and then something horrible would happen. A lot of kids I went to high school with started overdosing and dying. And I'm getting a lot of phone calls when I'm in Boston about, so-and-so, the parents found him just blue in the bathroom. And so something like that, if I was trying to manage my intake of drinking, would come in and I would just go I got to have a drink to deal with this. And then there was the times where I was just bored and I didn't know what to do and nobody was answering the phone. I was just sitting around and I was I guess I should just have a drink. And through this whole process, I always seemed to start drinking again. And so I would hit these walls, and every one time I remember calling Will, and he answered the phone, and I start laying out whatever was going on at the time. I have no idea why. I just remember I'm walking, and he just stopped me, listened, and he goes, well, hey man, I go to AA and it works for me. And that was it. He didn't say, would you like to come to a meeting? He just said, I go to AA, it works for me. And what he did to this day is still one of the greatest demonstrations of living this program outwards in the world that I've ever seen. Because what was attractive to me was not his insight to the 12 steps, or that he was like Mr. A. I mean, I didn't know anything. All I knew was everybody loves this guy. He loves everybody. And his only thing that he's ever told me is that he went to Alcoholics Anonymous and it worked for him. And so I became, I had this one person there that was like that little bit of shining light in the world. And I ended up in New York. I had no work. I ended up getting called to be a roadie for a band in the jam band world. Anyone's familiar with jam bands? There's a lot of partying in the jam band world. And on this particular trip, I ended up locked up in some, rural county in Georgia with some felony possession charges. And I don't know if you've ever been in a county jail or whatever, but they have the the phones on the wall. And so I get let in, and it was a guy named Wilbur that arrested me down in Georgia, and I had to get naked and sprayed with lice killer and the whole bit. And I'm in the orange jumpsuit with the rubber shoes, and I go into this cell and I'm thinking, all right, how am I going to break the news to the parents that this is where I'm at? And I didn't understand what a collect call was. And so I don't know if you've ever done this, but you pick up the phone and they ask for your name, and then there's an automated voice that tells you exactly where that phone is coming from. And it literally said, you were receiving a collect call from an inmate at the McIntosh County Prison. Do you accept the charges? And again, it was like parents to the rescue. And I was in that county jail. It was like a Monday. The joke is on the actual paper that they gave me, the time of arrest was 4:20 in the afternoon. And I'm serious. And I got out at Friday at noon, because in this town it was 1,500 people and the judges had day jobs, and there was no fast, expedient process. And I flew back to New York on my parents' dime one more time, and I landed in New York, and all I could think about was how awful these people had treated me and how ridiculous this system was, that they could lock me up. Don't they know who I am? and my friend, this wonderful lady named Lindsay, was in town, and I picked her up, and we went out to some nice restaurant. I bought us a bunch of wine, and I went to see my buddy in the hood, and I sat there and complained about the state of Georgia for the evening. And I was right back to doing exactly what I did. The minute I hit the ground, not one thought ever that maybe the drinking wasn't working out, that the way I was living was actually what was killing me. Towards the end of that first year in New York, it really dawned on me that I'm screwed. And what became operative for me was suicide. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but I was waking up every day going like, if it gets bad enough, I'm just going to go kill myself. I'm going to try to drive up to the woods somewhere upstate and just take as much of everything I can get my hands on and try to die in my car. I don't know about you, but today I can see the selfishness in that. And that became a real plan. Because for me at the end, there was no enjoyment in drinking anymore. It was just trying to get back to what normal used to look like. And when you're waking up and all that you're trying to do is just get back to normal, it's really painful. And all those other friends that I had been hanging out with that were also seemingly getting messed up on a regular basis, they started asking me to go. Because I was on a whole other plane than most of them. And they would look over me on the couch about to pass out, and they didn't know what was going on, but they said, hey man, you should probably go. And so I have a lot of nights where I don't know how I ended up driving from one part of Brooklyn to the next. But I would end up in my bed, and I started having these moments where I was just coming to. I don't remember falling asleep. The last time I remembered it was sun out, and now it's dark, and I'm like on the couch or I'm on the floor. I don't know what's going on anymore. It's like these rolling brownouts. And it hit me that there was this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is actually the big book that I was getting in that treatment facility. It stayed with me the whole time. I never read it, never opened it. It just was like in a thing. But for some reason, I carried this book all the way through all of that. And I looked up, I was living in Williamsburg at the time in Brooklyn. It's like North Brooklyn. And I looked up AA meetings and, whatever, close to me, and I found this thing in Greenpoint. I said, all right, I'll go over this meeting. It was a Sunday, I think. It was like 5:30 or 6 o'clock meeting, something like that, early evening. And I showed up, and it was like all of the grandparents of the Greenpoint. It was like everybody was 65 and up, and I was 24 years old. And I looked at this, and I said, this can't be it. Like, you've got to be kidding me. This is not it. And I think there was one guy who might have been like 40, and he was like, dude, there's another meeting after this. It's a men's meeting. There's going to be young, like, stay. You should stay. And I think I bummed a cigarette from somebody. We were talking. That was the only reason why I already hadn't bolted. But a couple of younger people started walking up, riding their bike in. Someone on a motorcycle rolled up, whatever it was. And ended up staying for that meeting. That was early June of like 2011. And what happened from early June of 2011 until August 28th of 2011 was I became fully acquainted with what powerless means. I woke up almost every day of that span of time, and I wanted to be sober. I said, something's got to happen. And I went to AA meetings. There was meetings all over the place in New York. I mean, so you throw a stone, you hit a sober alcoholic somewhere. And I'm showing up, and they would say things like this. They would say, take my phone number. If you feel like drinking, give me a call. Okay. They would say, know when your next meeting is. Just have a plan. This is we do this a day at a time. Have a plan. Know where your next meeting is, and maybe get to more than a meeting a day. And they just said, how about this? You just don't drink between meetings. I can't do any of that stuff. I still can't do any of that stuff. What happened to me was I would leave the meeting, and like if this was a beer, if I already drank a little, this is where I would realize I was when I had realized that I had already started drinking. I never felt like it was a conscious choice. I would just come to and I was already holding a drink and had already been drinking. And it was like, what is going on? Because I'm also watching people come in and say, I just quit drinking and my life's great. Excuse me. And that just didn't work for me. And I don't know what happened, but I got brought to this place And I don't know if you guys remember when Hurricane Irene was happening. It was like the hurricane that wasn't. They thought it was going to be a big deal. And at the time, my plan was, I had the alcohol, I had the other stuff, and I had her, and that was my hurricane survival kit for the weekend in Brooklyn. And I just hit a wall. And on that Sunday, I remember sitting there, and we went to some restaurant, and I'm looking at this girl, and I'm looking at this food, and it was a nice place. And it was like a bomb was going off in my head. And I was like, there was no joy in any of this. I'm looking at her, and I'm like, whatever. I'm looking at the food, whatever. And I was annihilated that night. And the next morning, I woke up, and I went to my morning meeting, which was like 1 in the afternoon. And I roll out of bed, and I walk over there, and I stared at the floor for 55 minutes. And at this particular meeting, it was, I don't remember what the format was. I don't remember what anybody said. But at that meeting, at the last 5 minutes or so every day, they would say, is there anybody who feels like, they need to share? That if they're going to drink, they're going to, go get wasted, or they're going to hurt themselves or somebody else. Like, is there anybody that feels like they need to share? And here's what happened. My hand went up like this. And I got called on, and I heard words coming out of my mouth that I hadn't planned on saying. And I'll censor it a little bit, but what I said was, I'm screwed, and I don't know what to do. But if I'm not surrounded by you people or another one of these meetings, I know I'm going to be drunk and high tonight. It's going to happen. And when we stood up and we grabbed hands, these are strangers, mind you. We said the Serenity Prayer at that meeting, and I felt what I feel now telling you the story, which is this little tingle down my spine. And in that moment, all that I really remember was feeling that this was for me. And from that moment until today, I haven't needed to take a drink. I haven't needed to do any of the other stuff that I was doing. I can't tell you that in the moment I understood that's what was going on. But I know that 2 guys took me down to a coffee place, and they circled some meetings on a book. And I ended up at a 4:30 meeting. And then some guy who was also counting days named Patrick said there's a men's group up the street, and I went over there. And they all eat at some German restaurant. I'm sitting across with some other random guy at some other restaurant in the city. By the time I got back to my neighborhood, there was a 10 o'clock meeting in that same church basement that I had the 1 o'clock meeting. I went there. And I went home that night on August 28, 2011, and I was sober. And I woke up the next day and did the exact same thing. And something started to happen when AA felt like it was something for me. And I look at that today, and I understand that's the first 3 steps of our program. If you really listen to what I said, over a couple of months, what happened? I came to understand that I am totally without a solution against this. I still haven't quit drinking. I don't know if any of you guys identify with that. I was struck sober, is what happened. Every time I quit drinking, I started again. I didn't wake up one day and say, today's the day I quit. I woke up and said, I'm totally screwed. And I know that if I'm not surrounded by whatever's going on here, I will drink again. In that couple of months, being exposed to this stuff years before, knowing my friend Will, I believed that the people that were sober and Alcoholics Anonymous had found something that worked for them. My first experience of coming to believe that there was a power greater than myself was watching other people stay sober when I couldn't. Today that has a whole new meaning. But in the beginning, what got me here was I saw other people when I was new. I didn't believe if you had 5 years sober. I was like, there's got to be a cheat day in there, right? I literally didn't, 20 years, you got to be kidding me. It's like a diet. You take a cheat day. But the guy that had 7 days, and then I came back and was back on day 1, and he had 10 days. I went, how did that guy do that? One of these guys, I ended up living with him, nicknamed me 2-Day Devin, because he watched me come in and always have 1 or 2 days. It was impossible for me to stop. And when I felt this little jolt down my spine, I just said, this is for me. What I really did was I made a decision to put AA as the focal point of my life. And the one thing that hasn't ever changed is that. Now, the first guy that I asked to sponsor me, I wouldn't replicate what we did with anybody. But it worked, because I'm still here. And I love that man, and he gave me his time. And what we did was we got together and we read out of this book, The 12 and the 12. And I don't remember what I did. I remember I wrote some lists, and I have no real idea. But all I know is that there was a moment when I was a couple months sober where I felt okay. And I actually had a prayer that I laughed out loud in my car. It was like a giggle. And I said, all right, man, I'm here, show me. And I started to have an experience that I couldn't really put into words. And I was 18 months sober, and my friend hit me up and he goes, hey, I'm in China and I met your friend from high school, and you should submit a video to me because we need to get somebody out here in China for a couple of months to play at this nightclub. Your friend's about to leave, and all of a sudden I'm living in China for 2 months when I had nothing to do and I had no work. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen, and all of a sudden I'm living in China for 2 months, getting paid a weekly salary. They put me up in an apartment. You know, no one was here to get me to the airport. They just sent me a plane ticket to China and assumed I would get on that flight, and I was able to do that. And I ended up in China, and there was no meetings in China. And I didn't know much about these steps because my program in the beginning in that neighborhood in Brooklyn at the time was really just go to a bunch of meetings. That was what everybody was doing. And I got to a point where I realized I needed something else. And there was a moment where we had read all this stuff, and my sponsor at the time said, look, go raise your hand when they ask if, there's someone who can sponsor and see if you can help somebody. And I remember thinking, I have no idea what has happened. How would I ever be able to help anybody? I literally have no idea what happened. And I said, hey, I'd like to look at this other book. Can we maybe do a round of steps and go through this other book? And he said, yeah, we could do another round of steps again. Why don't you look at your calendar and bring your 12 and 12? And what I heard was, this is as far as this relationship can go. And I went looking for some people. There was a few guys that had been sober for a while that every time I saw them, they said something that always stuck with me. And my friend Gary and I ran into each other randomly. And I said, hey man, I'm trying to go through this big book, and you always say something that I seem to relate to. And he was like, well, I'm about to leave and go to New Zealand and Australia for 3 months, but let me have a think on it, and I'll keep you in the loop. And I ended up running into him the next morning at 9 a.m. And he's like, I actually just asked this guy to do a round of steps with me. Maybe this would work for you. And he connected me with this guy. This man, Ron, changed my life. Not that Ron, but different Ron. And Ron was a longshoreman who left school at 14. He failed out of school and just started working on the docks as a longshoreman up in Vancouver, Canada. And this guy says, look, here's the deal. We're going to do steps, and I'm going to take you right through this book. We're going to just do what exactly it says into here. But I'm 27 years sober, and I've sponsored so many people that, I want you to just do this stuff, and then I want you to go read the book. So we're just going to do this, and it's going to go as fast as you're willing to do it. And we did a round of steps really quickly. And he said, here's the deal. I want to make sure that you're completely crystal clear about every aspect of this program. Because what we're really doing here is learning how to carry a message. And he laid it out for me that the purpose of this program is not that I get sober. The purpose of this program is not that I get better. The purpose of this program is that I might be able to turn around and grab the next guy who's still in pain and say, hey man, you don't have to live like that. And if you read our steps, nowhere in this program does it say you're going to actually be sober. The promise is you're going to wake up. That as a result of taking these 12 steps and putting them into your life and living them as a way of life, you will have a spiritual awakening. It might take a more gradual approach, or it might be like a white light experience. But what you will realize at some point is that you react differently to the people around you. And what happened for me was, we went through these first 3 steps, and he really laid into the description of alcoholism in a way that nobody really had. And all he did was he took me right to the doctor's opinion and to the chapter more about alcoholism. And he started laying out that you're bodily and mentally different. And all of a sudden I understood why I couldn't just stop drinking. He asked me this question. He goes, were you ever able to control how much you drank every time? And I said, well, no. And I didn't want to. That was not the goal, was to control it. It was to get as wasted as I could. He goes, okay. He goes, how many times did you quit? And I was like, I don't know. I can't even count. He goes, were you ever able to stay stopped? I was like, no. Not until I showed up in a meeting and said I'm totally screwed and had this surrender experience. And he let me understand that the real powerlessness of alcoholism comes in the fact that I can't predict when I start drinking again, just as much as I can't control how much I drink. But both of those working together put me in a state where I have no control over what's going to happen. And we talked about this idea of God. And he said, the defense that you have to have is going to be something that we call God. Now that can be different and personal for everybody. But as I understand it today, for me, the word God is really just trying to sum up what's happened in a little over 8 years of my life. And there's so many moments that the only word I can use is something happened. Because there is no real, like, how do you end up living in China? You know, something happened and all of a sudden I'm living in China. Like, are you kidding me? So, I got real clear on this first step idea, and we talked about the internal unmanageability and how the real unmanageable part might not be that I can't hold a job or that I don't have a car or that I'm in a shelter. It might just be that suicide was an operative idea in my life. It might look like I wake up and I'm a prey to misery and depression, that I have trouble holding down any kind of employment. And this is a thing you can ask yourself today. I mean, this is part of how I'd like to have an active experience with my first step. I don't want to stand up here and think that today I'm choosing not to drink. I know today, just like every day of my life, essentially, I'm just as powerless today over alcohol as I was when I came in the door. But what's been afforded me is the opportunity to have a decision to put this program into my life from the moment I wake up rather than to hit that corner store. I believe that's God's grace. And we talked about that I might have trouble with personal relationships. He goes, it's like, are you having trouble with personal relationships today, right now? Is anybody having that? I look across my life and I want to use that as a tool. Like, how am I doing in the world? Am I angry at a lot of people? Do a lot of people look at me and have hatred towards me? Like, what am I doing to cause people to react that way, if I am? Today, there's not much. I come to believe every morning that this program will work, and I put it into action by making a decision. I get on my knees and I pray today. And we talked about that third step prayer. And if you really look at the third step prayer, not only is it waving the flag of surrender, but my current sponsor and I have talked a lot about that last sentence. It says, I got here and I thought, okay, it's a drinking problem, right? And they said, no, it's a lack of power problem. And I go, well, why don't I have any power? And if you really dig into this stuff, we start talking about what we would call the spiritual malady of this disease. And what that looks like for me is just extreme selfishness and self-centeredness. And I had no idea that I was selfish and self-centered. I mean, when I did an inventory with this man, at 27 years sober, he laughed at one point and said, you might be the most self-seeking person I've ever heard a fifth step from. And it was like revolutionary to me, because I was just so blind. I was so blind to what that might look like. The book says it might look like you're driven by 100 forms of fear. If I'm sitting here petrified and have a bunch of anxiety and I'm always thinking about tomorrow and what's going to happen, I might be in untreated alcoholism. It says you're going to have self-delusion. What does that look like? I didn't understand that one of the biggest problems that I have is my pride and my righteousness. And I want to be in the room and know that I'm better than all of you. I just didn't understand that was killing me. And he said, you're going to have to pray to have all that stuff removed. And the way that we're going to be able to remove that is we're going to get into this inventory and we're going to see it through to making these amends to clean it up. But the beginning is you're making a decision that you're going to make God the one in charge. And you're going to realize that you've been in the passenger seat all the time. It's like I've been in the cab reaching from the back trying to turn the wheel of the cab the whole time. There's a guy who's been driving and I've just been trying to steer him wrong the whole time. And but the biggest one for me today is that last sentence where it says, may victory over them bear witness to those I would help. And I didn't understand that in this third step decision there's a hook in there. And the way my sponsor today describes it is if all these things happen to you, if you find peace, if you find joy, if you find that fear is dialed down a bunch, and you're not so resentful, and you can actually feel at peace with yourself, will you go tell somebody what happened? That's what bearing witness is. And that's part of this decision. And the third step for me is I need to be willing to show up and do something like this and to talk about how God entered my life, to talk about my experience with this program. And so we got into this inventory stuff, and we look at resentments, we look at fear, and we looked at my conduct in personal relationships. They say now about sex, but they're really talking about how we conduct ourselves in those relationships. And here's what happened to me. I got sick of me. I think today that's the greatest gift of what our inventory process is about. I started to write down the resentments that I had. And I started to understand through the writing of this stuff that really what I was demanding was for you to be different than you were. And I wanted you to give me something that you weren't giving me. And as a result of you not doing these things, this fear got kicked up in me that I would be a failure and I'd be alone and I'd be stuck somewhere, like off to the side. Because that's how I always felt, was there's you guys and there's me. And that was my biggest fear, that I'd become, this homeless guy living in the park. And so all this stuff started to kick up, and I realized as I was writing this that it's like, man, it's the same thing every time. If my self-esteem gets affected and I think I'm insignificant and small and less than, my pride kicks up, my fear kicks up. I go out into the world and I try to figure out how to manage it and wrestle it into this thing that's going to allow me to be able to get what I want. And it never worked. And then we started looking at fears and we had some laughs, because everything I'm afraid of is all made up. I mean, if you really think that's like, what am I afraid of? Maybe in 3 years, am I going to have enough money to have a kid? That's not right now. That's like, am I going to really be able to understand what's going on 3 years from now? No. But I'll make up all these stories in here, and I start believing them, and then I'm afraid of what's going to happen. And then I start going out into the world, and if I go out into the world afraid, well, guess what? I'm being disconnected from this power that's keeping me sober. I'm rolling the dice on if I'll be able to stop or stay stopped or not. And almost 2 years ago, I had this experience listening to one of the guys in my sponsor family talk about fear. And I want to share the experience I had with you. He pointed out that in the big book, it says fear ought to be classed as stealing. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I used to steal stuff. And when I go to steal something, it's like, I want that. And then I go and I grab it and I put it here or wherever and I walk out with it. It's a very conscious choice. I know people that are like kleptomaniacs, for them they say, I just take stuff, I don't know I'm taking it. Like, I don't have that. I've made a choice, I'm going to steal this, and I'm taking it. And how does fear that just seems to be there and happen randomly be associated with this conscious idea of stealing? And this man said, he read the next part, and it says, why do we have these fears? Is it not because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. And what happened with me is I was able to draw the thread that whatever I become afraid of today in my life, it might be about career or money or relationships or whatever it is that might creep in that I'm afraid of. Have you ever been in a house with an alarm system? You open the window over here, it beeps over there. I see fear today is the alarm system of me relying upon self. And what that means to me today is this is an area of my life that I'm either unwilling or unable to trust God. And what I get to do today is I get to start having some pointed prayer and say, God, it's the career stuff. Can you please remove this fear that I seem to be unwilling to allow you to run my career? If it's about my relationship and I think I got to fix it at home, I say, God, will you show me how to be the husband that you need me to be? It allows me to start having some prayer, to start seeking a deeper surrender with my higher power on a really pointed level. And it changed my life, because now fear is not this horrible thing that I'm crippled by, but rather it allows me to have some pointed prayer, and I can get quiet and I can say, God, I need some help. And apparently I'm not willing to let you have this part of my life. But and it gives me the opportunity of, do I want to keep relying upon myself or do I want to rely upon God? And if I choose to live in fear, and I see it as a choice today, then I would class it with stealing. And it could be considered a conscious choice that I'm stuck here sitting in fear when I know that I have a solution, which is to lean into my higher power and to maybe put my hand out and try to help somebody else. When I got to the sex conduct stuff, here's the deal. I'm not a violent guy. I never hit anybody. But I took advantage of everybody that was ever kind to me. And for years, this is the kind of damage I did. I didn't even see these ladies as people. I didn't see them as people. It was just a means to an end. And I will tell you that area of my life also equated power, just like drinking equated power. And I had a really skewed idea of what this was supposed to look like or what it could look like. And one of the things that I did that was probably the most inconsiderate and potentially the most dangerous was for years I looked all these people in the eye and I said I was just at the clinic, I'm clean and engaged in, and you know what I'm talking about. And I will tell you that when I was 18 and I was in inpatient rehab, they took blood and they did all that stuff. And the next time I went to the doctor, I was 6 months sober and I was 25 years old. And I could have put a lot of people in a lot of awful situations because I had no idea if I was carrying something that would have been life-altering. And that's how inconsiderate I was. At my best, that was the best I could do, was completely run through your life and lie and manipulate and not see you as a person that was unique and had a story, had a family, had parents, had siblings, had friends. And when I wrote that particular part of my inventory at about 3.5 years sober, I was so disgusted with who I was. Because here's the real truth. If you had asked me what kind of a guy I was, I would not have been able to. I would have written all these great things. I'm a great guy. But what happened for me and what continues to happen for me when I write inventory is I'm squarely confronted with the actual actions I've been taking. And I look at the piece of paper, and what I see is not who I believe I am in here. And I believe that is the heart of the rub that we feel that might fuel us to continue going out there and drinking. They talk about we live a double life. And I present to you the character that I want you to like. And I didn't know for 5 years that I really cared about what you thought of me. And I was literally 5 years sober when I wrote vanity in my 4th column for the first time. And it really dawned on me that I really care how I'm viewed in the world. And that's crippling if you're suffering from that. And so I wrote this inventory. I got disgusted at myself. And when we shared it, we took it right into 6 and 7. And thank God we have these steps that are all about, are you willing to let God move you to a better place? And my initial understanding of the 6 and 7 step was now I can see all these horrible things about myself, and so I'm going to go to God and say, take all this stuff. And then my friend Rich was speaking at my home group. He happened to be in town from Ocean City, Maryland. And he pointed out that the prayer doesn't say, take all of me the bad. It says, take all of me the good and the bad. And over time, my practice with our 6 and 7 step started to include all the things that I become really attached to. And what that looks like is I get quiet in the morning and I'll say, God, if this is the wrong woman, if this relationship that I'm in is actually standing between me being who you need me to be, thank you for allowing me to have it and you can take it. If living in New York City stands between me being the man that you need me to be, take it. If this music business that I happen to have a career as a performer today, if that stands between me and being useful to you, thank you for allowing me to have this experience and take it. And I started offering up everything in my life that I thought was good. And what happened was I haven't lost any of that stuff so far. Maybe I will someday. But I became at peace with the fact that maybe I won't. My life might change at some point. Maybe one day it won't be this particular career or living in New York City or whatever it is that I would, my identifiers of who I am in the world. And that's okay. But it also allowed me to relax into all that stuff and say, I'm willing for God to take this, and it hasn't gone, so I guess this is where I can be useful too. And we all have something we can offer the world. And everybody sitting in here has something that is special just to you. And if you don't get out of the way and let that come into the world, then we're depriving each other of that. And so I really got this amazing experience that has really continued now over the last 4 years since that talk, where it's been about, as soon as I notice I'm attached to something, saying, God, if this new thing is standing between me and you, take it. Because all I want to really do today is be useful. I was a mess. And today I actually get to feel useful in the world. We got into amends, and this second sponsor that I had changed my life, but when we looked at the amends, I had stolen some stuff, and he said, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tally up everything you think you owe, and I want you to put money back in the basket. And I was like, wow, that's pretty awesome. That sounds great. And I started sponsoring people, and we talked about 10 and 11, and I'll talk about my practices with that in a sec, but I'm reading in the big book, and it has a couple of things where it says, I'm just going to read it because I'll screw it up if I try to quote it. But this is something that it was sitting with me, because I'm sitting there reading this with these guys, and it felt like this wasn't what I had been asked to do. And in this book right here, it says, no, I can't seem to find it. They talk about, we have decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. And we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing no matter what the personal consequences may be. We may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we are willing, we have to be. We must not shrink at anything. And when I read that and I reflected on the advice that this man had given me, everything was on point. But he didn't tell me to go up to these people that I had stolen from and make direct amends to them. And I read this and I go, man, this doesn't seem right. And I think you guys are going to get to meet my sponsor in a couple of months. He's going to be out here, I think, in April. And I met this man, and there was something about him. And I hope if you have a sponsor that you are attracted to them. And I looked in this man's eyes, and there was just something that was there. He had a light in his eye, and I knew he was present. And we connected over a few times hanging out at my friend's house in Brooklyn. He was just in town for a weekend to speak at something. And a few months later, I started getting this intuition that was pick up the phone and call Bart and ask him this question around these amends. And I don't hear voices. I don't have a relationship with God where I hear God talking to me. I mean, this is a one-way conversation. But I had this really pointed thing that was like, call this one person and ask him this one question. And this man's been my sponsor now for a little over 4 years. And what happened was I called him and I laid it out for him. And he goes, yeah, I don't know why people would ever suggest to do that. And he goes, the step 9 says we made direct amends to all persons we had harmed. He goes, that's pretty clear, right? All is all. And direct is like, if you can, face to face. You know, addressing the person that I harmed directly. Unless it's going to cause other harm. And it's pretty clear when you've been stealing from people, like, I'm not necessarily going to be causing more harm if I've stolen from it. I mean, maybe if it's like an ex-wife or like a relationship, you got to be a little careful. But he asked me to write a fear inventory on why I maybe wouldn't do that stuff. And I wrote that stuff out, and he helped me start going and paying the money back. And I got to make amends to a studio owner that I'd stolen a piece of gear from, and this guy didn't want anything back. He forgave me. He goes, your intent to return this is fine by me. I don't want it. And I called Bart. I go, what do I do with this? He goes, well, he set the terms. He doesn't want it. You know, so you can insert your will on it and try to give it back to him, but he said he doesn't want it, so another door closes. And I'd stolen some money from my friend's parents when I was like a little kid, like 7th grade, bought a bike with it. And this is the one kid that like made it. He was sober maybe another 5 years from me. And I ran into him in Chicago. I was traveling, and he came out to the show, and I said, I owe your parents an amend, and can you ask them how they'd like me to contact them? And he came back and said they said email. And so I emailed his parents, and I laid it all out. I said, look, this is why I'm contacting you. This is what I did, and I'm trying to figure out how to make it right. And they wrote back, and they said, it's so great to hear from you. We're glad you're doing great. We don't want any of the money. Instead, we'd like you to use the money you stole from us and contribute it back to someone else's continued recovery. And I'd gotten to make amends to my family the first time around, and I remember talking to my parents and sitting down, and we had a tearful conversation. I just said, look, I don't know how to make this right, but you guys gotta know this is real, and I'm doing this. And they told me all they've ever wanted was for me to be happy, and they wanted their son back. And ever since that day, I've been calling them and telling them all the good things in my life. And they get to see me happy. I don't call them and like complain about anything in the world that I might have an issue with. I call them and we talk about what's going on with them. And we've had this amazing relationship. But about this time last year, my mom told me that it took until I was sober 5 years for the phone to ring a little bit late at night and her not to get that sinking feeling in her stomach that something was wrong with me. And what that did, she thought it was this little offhanded thing, and I like stopped and tried to explain how important it was for me to understand that it took 5 years of me living this program for healing to take place with her. It hurt that much. And what I've learned about this process of amends is it's kind of a global deal, I think. If I go to you, I stole from a corner store. If I go to the corner store and I pay him back and start stealing from the other corner store, did I really make amends? No, I'm just displacing harm across different people. So I can't really go and do these things. I might not actually be willing to go and make amends if I'm not willing to globally have the behavior change. And that's huge for me. And we talk a lot about that. The guys I get to sponsor, we talk a lot about actually living different. If you think about an amendment to the Constitution, that's a permanent change in a document. And so if I'm going to amend my life or my behavior, I need to be willing to let that change and work towards that with God's help across like the entirety of my life. Some of these guys in my sponsor family are a little crazy. You're going to get, in a couple weeks, Chris is going to be here, and I was listening to some of them talk, and I started getting quiet in the morning and going, like, if there's any unmade amends that are out there that I'm not aware of, please let me see them. And I remember Chris. And Chris was a drug dealer that I'd ripped off for like $1,600. And so I'm like, oh man, I didn't expect that. And I called Bart and I go, what do I do with this? And he just goes, if it was a tab at the bar, you'd pay it, right? It's like, I guess so. And he goes, well, there you go. Pretty easy. And I found this guy. He lived in Portland, Oregon. I don't have the money to fly out there, and I found him through an ex-girlfriend on Facebook. I mean, this is maybe the digital age story of an amend, but I reached out to this guy and I said, look, I'm trying to get you on the phone. There's something that's not sitting right with me from the past, and I want to be able to try to clear this up with you if I can. And I had $500 that I was going to just try to wire him, and I was going to offer $100 a month until it was paid. And he basically came back and said, like, whatever you think you owe me, like, it's forgiven. You don't owe me anything. And I was like, no, you need to understand what this is. And I, like, laid it out for him completely. And his response to me was, the fact that you're even coming to me and trying to make this right shows that whatever you're doing is working. Just keep doing what you're doing. And so all these things that I might have had a lot of fear about doing because I had been stealing things and I was afraid they're going to lock me up or something's going to happen, I was forgiven across the board. It's incredible. And what I've done today is I've made it my mission to kind of follow my friend's parents, which is like I'll take a guy out for coffee. I'll get some gas in my car. I'll drive up to the prison that's an hour and a half north of the city, and I'll sit there with the guys that killed somebody in a blackout and are now doing 12 and a half to 25. That could have been me. But I have some friends today that I've gotten to meet that are extraordinary people that have to do a lot of time behind bars. My friend came out of a blackout and the mattress was on fire from a cigarette. And a firefighter in New York City died, and he ended up getting a 20 to life sentence. And I used to come to out of these rolling brownouts, and there would be my blanket smoldering on my lap, and I just pat it out. This program has allowed me to do things that I never imagined would be possible. I've got clearance at the state. I've got clearance in the city jails. I've been able to go into hospitals and institutions and just talk about what happened with this program. And they leave me alone. They let you go into this locked unit, and they're like, all right, do your meeting, have fun. Like, are you kidding me? I got into this idea of 10 and 11 and 12, and all I ever wanted to do was be helpful. I shared that fifth step with that guy, Ron, and it changed my life, and this fire started in me. And basically all I wanted to do was I wanted to sponsor as many people as I could. I mean, it was literally like, I have to give this away. And one of my heroes says, once you wake up, you can't not be useful. And another one of my heroes says, if you're wondering if you've had a spiritual experience, you haven't. It's like, when you get this thing going, something is different. And, but our book says you can't give it away if you don't have it. And I don't think that's just the directions. I think that's on the spiritual awakening side of this thing. What are we transmitting? Am I transmitting directions, or am I telling stories and trying to show you how God entered my life? I found out that I could have a great morning practice of prayer and meditation. I could have a nightly review and be, a lot of outside reading in our 11th step. But if I don't actively watch how I'm living through the day, it doesn't really do anything for me. It's kind of just the equivalent of getting the God idea, sitting in my chair, coffee, do all the prayer, do the meditation, and then it's like, all right, God, I'll let you know how I do when I get home. That doesn't work. I had a series of 6 months where every single night I wrote the same answers on my nightly inventory. And then it dawned on me, if I don't have any kind of active 10-step practice, if I'm not watching for this selfishness or this resentment or this dishonesty or this fear, if I'm not watching where I'm being inconsiderate as I'm living life through the day, it doesn't matter how zenned out I am in the morning or at night if I sit down and review my day. And so I've learned that I need all of that. And I need to be really vigilant through the day. Because one little thing can happen and I'll snap at my wife. Or I'll do something really inconsiderate and she'll tell me about it. And I still have the power to hurt the people that I love the most. Those are usually the first ones that get hit. And Bart and I talk a lot about how it's a practice. He's like, we don't do this perfectly, we practice. And we try to carry a message. And the hope is that it's a clear message. And for me, the best way to do that is to get acquainted with not just the big book, but I love the 12 and 12 too later. It's got a lot of great stuff in there. It doesn't have any directions, but it's got a lot of good food for thought. And I got really lucky. I got into some general service stuff. and I found a man who was a past delegate in the New York City area, 49, and we sat down, and I had no idea there was 12 concepts. I was just clueless. I saw it on the wall once. I was like, what is that? And this man, Terry, sat down with me, and we went through these traditions and concepts, and he showed me how Alcoholics Anonymous works on like a nuts and bolts level. And now I get to come to a meeting, and I'm really grateful at all these people that are out there like facilitating that we could have literature, that we could be able to even be here and like have this stuff available to us. It's like the greatest time to ever be born as an alcoholic, because Alcoholics Anonymous is already here and working. The fact that you guys have this meeting here once a week, and it sounds like you have a big book study on Thursday, which if I lived in the neighborhood, I'd be at. The fact that you have that is incredible. And not everybody gets that kind of an experience of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I travel a lot. It's not always the same. My life has been changed. I'm not suffering today from untreated alcoholism. My mind does not tell me that a drink will fix it. Because I haven't had a drink in a little over 8 years, I'm not physically craving alcohol. The only thing I have ever done is submit to what this program asks of me. And I feel connected to some power on a regular basis. And I believe that's available to everybody. You just need to be willing to go and get it. Bart asked me the first question. He goes, who's responsible for your recovery? I am. He goes, if I ask you to consider something or write something, it's take an action and you're unwilling to do that, will I be able to be effective? I said, no. He goes, okay. He's been one of the greatest people I've ever come into contact because he's never given me a direction other than I should either write the inventory or get quiet and ask God for some direction and do what I feel and let him know. He's the person that has encouraged my seeking outside of just the big book. I asked him for a list of other people he got influenced by. He sent me a whole list of stuff. I started reading all this other literature. And what I found is all these other spiritual traditions basically say the same thing in here. That it's all about love and it's all about people. And we need each other. And I've gotten to sponsor a whole bunch of guys. I don't know how much time I can take up here. But I'll tell you a quick couple of stories about some of these guys because it's truly tremendous. Shortly after I came awake, I met this gentleman, and he was less than 2 months sober, and he was getting kicked out of New York City, and he had to move in with his brother down in Washington, D.C., and on his way out the door, I guess he applied for an apartment, and they said, basically they said they denied him the apartment, and he broke a bunch of stuff in the store, and he was tells me the story, he's like, I see myself on video camera breaking all these things and know this is not going to go well. And so he ends up in D.C., and he'd been sober before, and he knew that this program worked, and we identified as alcoholics, but with all the other stuff in my past, we had some other stuff in common, and he's done a lot of service in this other fellowship. And he had asked about 7 people for help, and they all said they were too busy. And he asked me, and I said, absolutely, let's do this. And within a month, we were doing a 5th step. And shortly thereafter, he was making amends. And this guy was living in his brother's basement, and he didn't have any citizenship anymore. His family's from London. He had blown through his visa. And he was living in his brother's basement for over a year, and they were fine. Him and his brother and his brother's wife were like, God, you got to get out of here, please. And he realized that he probably had a warrant out for his arrest in New York because when he'd broken all this stuff in this realty office or whatever. And we started a conversation of what was worse. To live in fear of not knowing what would happen if on your visit to New York City you get stopped. He's like a 6'5", beautiful black man. That's like stop and frisk all day in New York City. You know what I'm saying? He's worried about if he comes into the city and doesn't have a visa and has a warrant, what's going to happen? And I posed him the question of what was worse, to actually show up and take accountability for your actions or to live in the fear. And he made the decision to seek out some friends of his that were lawyers and find out. He did have a warrant out for his arrest. He showed up in New York City in a lower Manhattan detention center and arrested himself, turned himself in. 30-some hours later, he got released with a court date. He shows up for the first court date, the other people aren't there. Comes back in a month, the other people are there, and the judge throws the whole thing out. A couple months later, he says, hey, I'm getting married in City Hall today, you want to come? I show up to City Hall. I get to watch him get married, we have a little hang, we get some food. And one day he sends me a photo of a green card. This is like November of 2016. And he was able to get on a plane a couple weeks after he got that green card and go visit his family His dad had been in the hospital for about 5 months, really sick. And I got to watch this man be able to get on a plane, fly to England, and be there with his family and be his son. He's an openly gay man, and his parents are Baptist preachers, and they had a lot of stuff with that growing up. But he wanted to be there with his family, and he got to get on that plane, and he got to go over there, and he got to come back. And he's sober today. It's about 4.5 years now, and he's like rocking out. He's got a whole bunch of sponsees. He's like in the middle of this thing. He's fired up, and he's living free. And they even made him a world delegate of this other thing. He got flown out to like Phoenix to speak at some huge state convention. I mean, he's like rocking and rolling. And it's so awesome because I just get to watch that. I have another friend who came in and he was crying in the corner in that same church basement that I got struck sober in. And we sat down in a diner, and this guy he ordered a meal, he couldn't even eat it. And we ended up taking a third step an hour later in this park. And I got him a notebook and a pencil. And he's sober today, but about 6 months his daughter was born, and the mother was kind of losing it. She was having like a psychotic episode, and he's holding this 5-week-old baby with his friend there, and she comes and attacks him. And the way of it was her family had money, and the lawyers on her side got it so situated that like he got this daughter of his ripped out of his life, and he didn't do anything wrong. And I watched him struggle and not get anything that he wanted. He's sober today, and I saw his roommate on Thanksgiving. I got to talk to him, and he's hanging out with his 3-year-old daughter. And finally, he's able to have a relationship with her, and they've like taken away the supervised custody. And those two guys, it's like I saw a guy who got a lot of awesome stuff, stay sober, and I saw this guy who literally got pummeled by the New York City courts. And he was able to stay sober, and what he did was he continued to live this way of life. And there's a whole lot of other stories. I'm gonna stop talking here in a sec. But this program has changed me. I need you guys. I need to do service. I have a home group, as we said. It's No Serenity Till Brooklyn. We have 4 meetings a week. They allow me to do a whole lot of service there, and I'm grateful for it. And if you ever find yourself coming out, please look me up. If I'm not able to be there, I'll connect you with people. And I got married in September. I didn't even get to talk about that. You know, I painted this picture of this guy who wasn't able to do anything. I've been in a relationship with 6 years, and I haven't even had an argument. You know, this lady allowed me into her life, and she's normal. She's not alcoholic. She's not Al-Anonic. She's normal. And she allows me to do things like this. And she has like oversight. I have to ask her, am I allowed to go do this if it's a night we might get to hang out at? And we don't argue. And we have a tremendous relationship. And it's all because of this program. Everything in my life is because of this program. So I hope that you guys, if you're in here and you're struggling, you know, this can really work. All you need to do is bring a willingness. And if you're willing to go and get it, you can have it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Devin, for coming here tonight and spending the time with us to deliver that incredible message of hope and recovery. You did a fantastic job. That was awesome. I know we're a little bit over already. A couple of quick announcements. There's always a meeting after the meeting, so if you're new or if you're struggling or if you've been around here for a little while and it's just not working for you,